Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first story is titled, "Don't Want to Spell Correctly My Name? Okay, I'll stop paying taxes." So, this one dates back from years ago, when you would fill your income statement manually, like with a pen on a form. In those days, in my country, we didn't have a withholding tax system, but you would pay in year, say 2007, the taxes on your income of year 2006. Of course, the form would come by mail pre-filled, with name and details, and also some quite accurate amounts, because the state knows already pretty well how much you make. My family name is a bit complex, being multi-part and with unusual letter clusters in the middle. Mistakes are understandable, but you would expect the Revenue Service to be exact on that matter. Unfortunately, they weren't. They kept misspelling it every year on the form, and on all the subsequent forms, tax statement, tax returns, etc., they would mail me, despite my correcting it manually every year on my income statement. In black. Then in red. Then the following year with neon red Sharpies. Then 1 year later adding a sticky note. Then adding a whole letter. Then adding a letter and copies of my ID as proof, etc. But they weren't budging. It was quite irritating, because the tax statement has to be shown on several occasions when you interact with the state administration or justice. Everybody would notice the discrepancy. Everyone was understanding that it was obviously a mistake from the Revenue Service. But it was still annoying on so many levels, the most basic of which being a matter of respect for my identity. After 10 or 12 years of them not taking notice of my notes and corrections, upon receiving a payment notice still misspelled, I went in person to my local Revenue Service office and asked to speak with someone about that issue. I made it very clear to the clerk that they were wrong. He was adamant that they were correct, like I wouldn't know my own name, and added, for good measure, that he couldn't change my name in their systems because he didn't have access to that blah blah. I was having none of it. So, cue malicious compliance. Me, so, you said you were positively, absolutely right, about my name spelling? Clerk does not answer. Me, I shall therefore stop paying my taxes. I am not the person on your forms. And there's no way you can come to me asking for that tax money, since the person on your forms doesn't live at that address, and in fact does not exist. Clerk, mouth is gaping. Eyes are so wide open they're going to pop out. Me, but in case you need the tax money, you know how to write my actual name. And I left with a smirk. I actually did not pay that tax installment in those days. You paid your taxes in 3 installments over the year. 2 weeks later, I got a reminder letter, without the 10% penalty normally owed for late payment, and with my name correctly spelled. Shouldn't have wasted so many Sharpies over the years. The next story is titled, "Can't Have Hair Past My Shoulders?" Okay. This isn't my story, but my dad's. Growing up, my grandma had this one rule for hair for her boys. You can't have it touching your shoulders. So what did my dad do? He grew it to his shoulders, then started putting it up into a mohawk. His mum didn't complain, and neither did he, because the girls at his school would love to touch his hair and braid it. He had to shave it off as he was in swim and some district championship was coming up. But he always credits it to being the best week of his high school career. The next story is titled, "Double Billing." I have a close friend who is an executive director for a small state trade association. There is a national trade association for this same industry, but the two associations are independent of each other. The national trade suggests that the two associations partner on an event in her state and split the profits. Executive director agrees. They spend months planning the event together. About a month after the event, she receives a bill in the mail from the national trade. It seems they kept track of every phone call during the planning. They itemized all the planning sessions in 15-minute increments. Apparently, that is their minimum charge. Executive director was incredulous. She called the national trade demanding an explanation. Their response was that she should bill them for her time as well. Executive Director replicates their bill in its entirety, including the hourly billing rate on the state trades letterhead. Executive Director includes a letter suggesting that, since their bills cancel each other out, it might be best for both of them to void the bills. The National Trade never responded back, and Executive Director never paid their bill. She now refuses to partner with them on events. The next story is titled, Boss Took Every Chance to Order Me Around, and It Backfired Hard. A little bit of context: I moved to Barcelona, Spain when I was 18 and got a job after a terrible internship teaching EFL, English as a foreign language. The degree that sent me out there, in a private school just outside the city. My boss was an elderly woman. We'll call her Rosie, whose only purpose in life was to show her control over every student, teacher and staff in this school. It was a very small school, only 4 or 5 teachers including me, a receptionist and Rosie, whenever she deemed the school worth her time. Whenever she visited, however, she would make our lives hell, and, for some reason, she did not like me. I was the youngest out of every member of staff there, but because I was a 6 inches heavy-set woman, I really did not look my age, and acted with a level of professionalism that my age didn't matter. Anyway. Firstly, she demanded that I not tell any of my students my age, and told me to lie because I was too young, even after presenting my passport and ID at my interview. She only found out I was 18 after she hired me. Fine, fair enough. I taught a lot of age groups, including 2 full classes of teenagers who probably wouldn't respect me if they found out I was only a few years their senior. The trouble began when the weather started getting hotter. Even though we would teach in the evenings, Spanish weather grew increasingly hot, and because Rosie didn't allow me to show my tattoos, I was forced to wear jeans or full-length trousers to hide them. She didn't have any problem with another teacher's 2-sleeve tats, only a small inscription I had on my ankle and a medium-sized dragon on my shoulder. The classrooms were fitted with AC units, which we naturally assumed we could control, as the remotes were kept on our desks. Being a UK citizen who needed to get used to the heat, I normally had the AC running throughout my lessons, which sometimes took 3 hours with little to no breaks, so the rooms would get stuffy and overbearing if the AC wasn't on. Rosie found this out and, at random points during my lessons, would walk in and grab the remote, turning the AC either off or to 25 degrees C. She wouldn't acknowledge me or my students, and, because my classroom had a huge glass sliding door, would stand behind it and watch me. It got annoying. I was also never allowed to speak Spanish in my classes. Only English. I was learning Spanish, but also was the only monolingual teacher there, and Rosie shoved many beginner levels at me. But that problem ceased after a while when I began to understand more and more of what they were saying. Rosie then decided that my teaching method, which students would account was friendly and chilled out, but would get the job done, wasn't following the syllabus. It was. I just found more creative ways to teach other than reading from a PowerPoint like the other teachers, and demanded I simply read from the book. Fine. Whatever. So, that's what I did. My teenagers, who at this point I had grown a really close and amazing relationship with, knew exactly what was going on. I told them what was about to happen for the next couple of weeks, and they agreed wholeheartedly. So, I began. My students would arrive early or on time, and immediately went about opening their books to the next chapter needed to be taught. The books were set out where you can read the information and have quiz questions on the next page to see how much you've learned. My students whizzed through these in record time. Even the slower students only taking about half an hour to complete the full chapter, which would have been taught over the space of 1 week. When everyone was done, and the questions were filled out correctly, I would then begin my normal teaching, incorporating games, quizzes, videos and even songs into my lessons so the students could fully understand the material along with having fun at the same time. Needless to say, Rosie was pissed. She asked me into her office and told me I wasn't listening to her, and that I needed to use the book. She said she would be watching my next class to make sure the book was being used. And I agreed, leaving her slightly confused. Next class, the students came in, completed their mandatory book work, and I continued my lesson, making sure the students knew everything that was being taught. I even, as a petty revenge, got them to sit a test I had written about the last month's worth of material and went through the answers in class. Rosie was gobsmacked when almost every student got 90% and up. Rosie always tried to undermine my teaching methods even after that. But when the report cards came in and she saw my class had gone from an intermediate English level to advanced in a matter of months, they had been intermediate for the last 2 years studying at the school. She never questioned my methods again. I left after a year there to move back home for family reasons. And I heard from a few of the teachers that carried on working that all of my students either left when I did, or dropped levels in English because they were put into her class. My last petty revenge before I left was to let every single one of my students know I was only 19. Leaving my teenagers shocked and amazed I had kept it a secret for so long, they immediately added me on Instagram and keep checking in to see how I am. Even 4 years down the line. The next story is titled, "You Want Me to Do Your Job? Fine. I'll do your job." I used to work in a hospital, sanitizing and sterilizing medical equipment and supplying it to the medical staff. We used a lot of specialized machinery and autoclaves, all of which required daily documented inspection and quality control testing. My supervisor was supposed to do all of that. It was above my pay grade. But she decided I should take it over because I worked nights and I had more time to do it than she did during the day shift. So she walked me through how to do all of it, and showed me how to fill out the forms. She wanted me to attach the printouts from the machines to the completed forms every morning, and then leave them on her desk for her to sign and file. But the thing is, night shift wasn't slow. I was responsible for putting together all of the instruments, equipment and supplies for all of the following day's scheduled surgeries, as well as handling any emergency surgeries that came through on my shift. It was often a madhouse, and I was on my own to deal with it. I knew I couldn't guarantee that I would be able to complete the QC every night, and I told her as much. Then she accused me of being lazy, and said with my review coming up, I needed to be a team player. So that night I did all the inspections and tested all the equipment. I filled out the forms and attached the printouts. And then I signed my own name on them and left them on the department manager's desk. She called me at home that morning, confused by the reports with my name on them. Oh, since it's my first night taking over QC from supervisor, I wanted to make sure I was doing it right. Supervisor was fired. I was promoted to supervisor's role. Not because of my malicious compliance, but because I had the most experience and seniority after her. And hey, I already knew how to do the QC. The next story is titled, "Some Malicious Compliance at the Grocery Store." A few hours ago, I grabbed my bag and mask and ran to the grocery store for the food I'd need for the week. I didn't want to spend too long with the face mask on, so I hurried from aisle to aisle. Finally, after I had everything I needed, I headed to checkout. Everything was going smoothly until the cashier made her way to the burger patties I grabbed. She searched the package, but couldn't find a barcode. She called over to the woman working at customer service that she needed assistance finding the price of an item. The customer service attendant was in the middle of reprimanding another employee when the cashier called over to her. The exchange went like this. "Cashier, Mary? I have an item here that doesn't have a barcode. Could you come over?" Attendant, "Size, I'm busy. Don't worry about it." She waved her hand dismissively and went back to what she was doing. Cashier, with a smile spreading across her face, "You don't want me to worry about it? Like, at all?" Attendant, rolling her eyes, "Yes. Do whatever." The cashier turned to look at me, malicious compliance in her eyes. She shrugged and placed the hamburger patties into the bag. I gave her a look of worry, not sure if it was okay. She laughed and said, "Hey," she said, "to not worry about it. You're all good." And that is my first malicious compliance story. I really want to thank the cashier for being incredibly kind. I was having a really rough day, and this encounter really helped pick me up. The next story is titled, "You Want a Dirty Room?" Okay. For starters, I'm 18 and just graduated. My family is military, so I won't get a job until our last move, which is thankfully this next one. My brother is 17, and can be a real jerk. He's super picky about everything, from food, his French fries cannot touch his burger, to his room, coming in a bit. We thought he was on the spectrum and got him tested, but he wasn't even close. Which is strange, right? Anyways, in order to earn my keep at home as an adult with no job, I clean the house, sometimes make dinner, etc. My brother, however, has always told me not to touch his things. When I first vacuumed his floor, I had to move so many things just to see it. He got upset and went to our mum, who told me to not touch his things if he doesn't want me to. Cue malicious compliance. It's his choice to have a dirty floor, right? And he doesn't want me to touch everything that covers it. Fine. This whole quarantine I haven't cleaned his room one. Just yesterday my mum asked me to clean it. Because I follow the rules I told I couldn't. He doesn't want me to touch his things. Fine, clean it yourself. The next story is titled, I Haven't Seen Him. A decade ago, I worked at a warehouse. Big warehouse, served the northern half of Alberta. Several dozen shipments a day, each one several pallets, average 5 feet high. To meet this demand, there were 20 to 30 guys in my position alone. In just our section of the warehouse. And we worked with at least 100 other people. New hires got to enjoy a special interview every week for 3 months, in which a supervisor would politely tell us that we weren't cutting the mustard, and would not last through our probation if we didn't speed up significantly. It was great for morale. For 6 weeks, I would hear the same supervisor call out a mispronunciation of my name over the PA. Every time, I would walk into the supervisor's office for my interview, and correct him. Think major, pronounced major vs muhjore. The 6th time he did it, I was sick of correcting him. I walked into the office, and calmly said, "My name is Major. I've told you this 6 times now. The next time you call for muhjore, I won't answer." "What's wrong with muhjore?" he asked. "Seriously. It's someone else's name." The next week, when my turn came up again, and his voice blares out his standard call over the PA. "MUHJORE to the shipping office. Looking for John MUHJORE to the shipping office." I went about my job. 5 minutes later, he calls again. Again. I ignore him. 20 minutes pass, several more calls. Another supervisor comes out searching for me. "John, Alan's been calling you for a while now. You need to get going." "No, he hasn't. He's been calling for John MUHJORE. I've told him that's not my name 6 times now. But if I see John MUHJORE, I'll tell him Alan's looking. Alan is looking for you. So let's go. You tell Alan if he wants to see me. All he needs to do is call my name." "What's your name?" "He knows." The supervisor walked away, and I just kept on working. John Major to the shipping office. I worked there for years. He never needed correcting again. The next story is titled, You Want Me to Sing While Watering the Plants. Remembered observing this beautiful act that happened a year ago at my aunt's place. They've a pretty sizable inner courtyard, in the center of which my aunt has a few small plants. She believes that you should always sing a hymn while watering these plants. My cousin had recently joined them there for a vacation, and so he was helping around the house, and a responsibility he took up was watering the plants. Now one day I visit them, and things are going well. Suddenly my cousin remembers he hasn't watered the plants, and so he gets up to water them. My aunt sees this, and as he gets up, she chides him, and at the end says, "You need to sing while watering them." Now obviously she wanted him to sing a hymn that was pleasant. What she forgot was his admiration for rap music. Suddenly, out of nowhere, we hear him singing the lyrics to Kendrick Lamar's Humble at the top of his voice. Now my aunt and uncle are rather traditional, so these lyrics really made my aunt embarrassed, while I'm sitting there enjoying this impromptu rap performance. The legend finishes watering them and just casually returns, humming the song all the way. I've never seen him watering them since then. The next story is titled, Me vs My 5th grade teacher, The Great Book Boogaloo. So some of y'all Zoomers may be familiar with our points. For those who aren't, R stands for Accelerated Reader, which was a program that assigned a reading level and points to each book based on the difficulty of reading it and the length. Where I grew up, we were expected to read as many books as possible and then take short online tests for them. If you passed, then you got however many points the book was worth was added to your R score. Now this was a big ducking deal. We had an uncountable number of dances, and parties, and prizes that you could only gain access to if you had a certain amount of points. You could buy candy and toys with your points, and we had an entire mini economy based on reading books and taking tests. Child me loved reading, and being an awkward horse girl. I usually had nothing better to do all day than read. I legit would take books with me to lunch and recess and just read. So naturally I dominated the R rankings. I was always the student who ended the year with the most points. And my teachers just loved getting to say the best reader in the school was in their class. This was all fine and dandy until I entered Mrs. K's class in 5th grade. Mrs. K had a policy where before taking an R test, you had to write a short summary of the book. This was to prevent students from trying to get points by taking tests for books they hadn't read and failing them. However, I was a reader, not a writer, and I resented this heavily. Mrs. K almost always had the one student and she wanted to win again. But 10-year-old refused to write the summaries. I had spent years not having to, so why should I start doing more work for the same thing? So I stopped taking tests. I kept reading, but refused to write a summary and take the test. I gave up the parties and the prizes just because 5th grade me refused to write a 1-paragraph summary of a book. Mrs. K tried to convince me to take the tests, and that she'd only make me write a few sentences. But I had made my choice. I had traded getting to do the cha-cha slide for keeping my moral high ground. She tried talking to my mum and my other teachers, but no one could convince me to do so. She resented that she was not going to have the student with the most points, but was unwilling to give up her precious summaries. She said she couldn't make a special exception for me because all the other students were still happily writing summaries and taking tests. Now I had held the number 1 ranking for years, and I wasn't about to give it up now. Summaries be damned. It was the last week of school, and I had taken less tests than nearly every other student in my class. I still had at least 200 points because the tests I had taken were for high-value books. But I was nowhere near number 1. However, I had a secret weapon. Harry Potter. Each book was worth an absurd amount of points, and I had just finished the series. So I begrudgingly wrote a few sentence summaries of each book and turned them into Mrs. K. I could see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to figure out what weird game I was playing as I turned in summary after summary. I also did the Percy Jackson series for good measure. I was being driven purely by spite. And I made a perfect score on each test, which netted me around a cool 200 points. This drove me back up to number 1. And oh how Mrs. K seethed. She pretended she was so proud of me for getting number 1. But I could feel her annoyance every time she looked at me. I had taken nearly the least amount of tests and wrote the least summaries in my class, but had somehow managed to have the most points in my grade. I went to our last R dance and did a victorious cha-cha slide, as well as buying all my classmates candy with my points. In the end, I did have to write a few summaries, but I felt like I had robbed Mrs. K of the satisfaction of seeing her system work. I felt like I had won. The next story is titled, "Don't Want to Expedite Fixing Your Mistake?" Cool, free phone for me. This happened many years ago, but the memory was prompted by another post here today. In late 2008, AT&T sold refurb iPhones for cheap just in time for the holiday season. I'd heard they'd be doing this a few months ahead of time, so I saved some money to get myself one. The rest of the story will highlight my fiscal irresponsibility, so I'll make the disclaimer here that I was a dumb kid, yada yada yada. The caveat was that you had to pay in full. But the phone was only $350-ish. So my phone ships and the money leaves my bank account. I had maybe $50 left in my account at the time, but my next check would be in a week later. Plus Christmas money was coming from family soon after, so not too big a deal. Until the day my phone arrives, there's a second charge for a second phone. I contact AT&T about it, but there's nothing they can do until I get the phone and ship it back to them. and only if they receive it in exact same condition will they refund my money. And only a week after they get it. Here I am now with this pending transaction, a second phone en route, and staring down overdraft fees I can't really afford. Second phone arrives. Call AT&T to see if I could just drop it off at a local store and get my money back. No go. Karen out. Asking for higher and higher managers. All to get told by all of them the same thing, nothing they can do. Etc. Until I reach Brad, who tells me the reason they can't do anything is because they don't know why I got a second shipment since their records show only one order. A light goes off in my head. I get Brad's direct number and head to the bank. Talk to my bank's manager, I knew him socially, and give him the rundown of what I'm planning to do. He's in. Call Brad. Get him on speaker phone with bank manager in room. And do this. Me, hey Brad, is there still nothing you can do? Brad, no Kairiko. You have to mail it back to us before we can do anything. M, but you only have the one order on record. Right. B, that's right. M, $350.99 for a phone which y'all charged me for on the 12th of February 2008. B, correct. M, and no order data for this pending charge. B, correct. M, well. I'm sitting with bank manager at bank, and he's ready to dispute the charges and refund me the money. Since you've admitted you don't have an order to back up the charges. It's a dispute you won't win. Plus I'll just keep this extra phone. Free of charge. Unless you can let me return it to a store today for an immediate refund. B, silence. B, let me double check. A few minutes later. Brad begrudgingly okayed the immediate refund. I brought the second device to a store, and was refunded the money. No overdraft fees since the refund and the charge went through same day. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel and post some bear emojis in the comment.